The clock showed 15 minutes
As you
remaining
can see
when
here,
Marcus
this
Callahan's
point
hand
is
began to
crucial for
tremble.
understanding the
800
concept.
pairs of eyes bore into his back from the packed auditorium of Ridgemont University, and somewhere beyond the stage lights, over 150,000 viewers watched through screens scattered across the globe. The equation on the chalkboard before him sprawled like a mathematical hydra, each variable spawning three more problems, each pathway leading deeper into territory he had never formally studied. His whiteboard held nothing but crossed-out attempts and half-formed ideas that collapsed under their own weight. From the judge's table, Professor Victoria Ashford's voice cut through the silence with surgical precision. Perhaps we should allow struggling contestants the dignity of withdrawal rather than prolonging this painful display. The words carried no malice in their tone, which made them all the more devastating. She sat there in her tailored charcoal suit, every strand of dark hair in place, the embodiment of academic authority, watching a man drown in waters she controlled. Marcus closed his eyes. The darkness behind his lids offered no refuge, only the ghost image of equations burning white against black. Somewhere in a hospital room 40 miles away, his daughter Hazel lay connected to monitors that tracked each beat of her failing heart. 10 years old, too young to understand everything about medical bills and insurance policies and the desperate arithmetic of survival, yet old enough to ask the question that haunted him now. "You'll win, right, Dad?" Her voice echoed through memory, thin as paper, bright as morning. "You always figure things out." $380,000. That was the price of the surgery that would save her life. The prize money from this competition would not cover even a quarter of what remained after insurance. But winning meant more than cash. Winning meant a PhD scholarship worth $250,000. Winning meant research positions with salaries that could actually support a child with chronic medical needs. Winning meant everything. And he was losing. The audience had grown restless. Camera operators zoomed in on his face, capturing the sweat beating at his temples, the tight line of his jaw, the way his fingers had gone white around the chalk. Social media feeds exploded with commentary. Hashtag Janitor Genius, which had trended for days with hope and defiance, now began filling with eulogies for a dream that had climbed too high. Then something shifted in the far corner of his vision. Dr. Constance Blackwood, the Princeton mathematician who served on the judging panel, rose from her seat. She said nothing, made no gesture, simply stood in silent witness. The movement seemed random, meaningless to most observers, but Marcus felt it like a hand on his shoulder in the dark. And suddenly he was not in this auditorium anymore. He was 22 years old, sitting in a cramped seminar room at Columbia University, listening to a visiting professor speak about the elegance of classical methods. The old man's voice had been reedy but certain. Modern mathematics often mistakes complexity for sophistication. The masters who came before us, Euler, Lagrange, they understood that the deepest truths were the simplest close. When you find yourself lost in a forest of symbols, remember that every forest has paths worn by those who walk before. Marcus opened his eyes. The equation on the board had not changed. It remained a graduate-level monster designed specifically to destroy him, pulled from Victoria Ashford's doctoral dissertation, a problem she herself had needed 3 years and unlimited institutional resources to solve. But now Marcus saw something he had missed in his panic. Beneath the modern notation, beneath the layers of abstraction, the problem had a heartbeat. It was asking a simple question, dressed in complicated language. He erased his board completely. 15 minutes was not enough time to follow the path Victoria expected. But perhaps it was enough time to find a different path entirely. The story of how Marcus Callahan came to stand in that auditorium began 6 months earlier on an October morning when the leaves outside Ridgemont University had just begun their slow surrender to autumn. Dawn broke over the Connecticut hills at 5:47 a.m., painting the Gothic spires of Ridgemont's main campus in shades of amber and rose. The grounds crew would not arrive for another hour. The professors slept in their faculty housing or commuted from New York. The students dreamed in dormitories that cost more per semester than some families earned in a year. Only the maintenance staff moved through those pre-dawn hours, ghosts in Navy coveralls, keeping the machinery of privilege running smoothly. Marcus pushed his cleaning cart through the empty corridor of Whitmore Hall, the rhythmic squeak of its wheels marking time like a metronome. At 33, he had developed the economy of movement that comes from doing the same job for 8 years. He knew which doors stuck, which lights flickered, which trash cans. The graduate students overfilled with coffee cups and energy drink cans. He knew the building better than most professors who taught in it, though none of them would ever think to ask him directions. His shift ran from 5:30 a.m. to 2:00 p.m., covering 3 buildings, 47 classrooms, 12 restrooms, and 8 laboratories. The work was physical but not demanding, repetitive but not mindless. It paid $42,000 a year before taxes, which was not enough to live comfortably, but was exactly enough to qualify for Ridgemont's Platinum Tier employee health insurance. That insurance covered 60% of major cardiac surgeries at approved facilities. Marcus had done the math when he took the job, and he had done it again every year since, when renewal time came around. 60% was better than any other employer in the tri-state area offered to hourly workers. 60% was the reason he was here. He paused outside room 217, checking his watch. The building would remain empty for another 2 hours, which meant he had time. He reached into the pocket of his coveralls and withdrew a small leather notebook, its cover worn soft from years of handling. The pages inside held no cleaning schedules or maintenance logs. They held equations. Mathematics had been Marcus's first love, the secret architecture of the universe that he had discovered as a lonely child growing up in a succession of foster homes across upstate New York. Numbers did not lie. Numbers did not abandon you. Numbers followed rules that remained consistent regardless of who you were or where you came from. In a childhood marked by uncertainty, mathematics had been the one constant, the one thing that belonged entirely to him. He had taught himself algebra from library books, at 12 calculus, at 15 linear algebra, and differential equations by 17. When he earned a full scholarship to Columbia University, the admissions committee had noted that his mathematical aptitude scores were among the highest they had ever recorded. By 21, he was already publishing papers that made tenured professors take notice. That was 12 years ago, another lifetime. Marcus opened the notebook to a fresh page and began working through a proof he had been developing for weeks. The symbols flowed from his pencil with the ease of long practice, connecting concepts from number theory and abstract algebra in ways that felt as natural as breathing. He had perhaps 20 minutes before he needed to continue his rounds, 20 minutes stolen from a life that no longer had room for the person he used to be. The janitorial closet in the basement of Whitmore Hall contained Marcus's double life. Behind the industrial cleaning supplies and the spare mop heads hidden in a compartment he had constructed himself sat 6 textbooks that would have been familiar to any graduate student in mathematics: algebraic topology, functional analysis, measure theory. The spines were cracked from use, the margins filled with his handwritten notes. He studied them during lunch breaks, during the quiet hours after his shift, when Hazel was at school, during the long nights when sleep refused to come, and the only escape from worry was the pure abstraction of mathematical thought. None of his colleagues knew about this secret library. To them, he was Cal, the quiet guy who covered shifts without complaint and always had a spare cigarette even though he did not smoke. They knew he had a daughter with health problems. They knew he was a single father. They did not know that the man who emptied their trash cans had once been called one of the most promising mathematical minds of his generation. Victoria Ashford arrived at Ridgemont University each morning at 8:45 a.m., precisely 15 minutes before her first appointment of the day. She drove a white Porsche Cayenne that she parked in the reserved spot closest to the mathematics building, a privilege that came with her position as the department's youngest full professor in half a century. Her office on the 4th floor featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the manicured grounds walls, lined with degrees from Harvard and MIT, and a shelf dedicated to the awards and honors that marked her meteoric rise through academia. At 37, Victoria had already achieved what most mathematicians spent entire careers pursuing. Her dissertation on nonlinear operator theory had solved a problem that had resisted attempts for decades. Her subsequent research had applications in everything from financial modeling to quantum computing. She served on the editorial boards of 3 prestigious journals, advised doctoral students who went on to positions at top-tier universities and commanded speaking fees that would have made some corporate executives jealous. But none of these accomplishments explained the particular quality of Victoria's ambition, the hard edge beneath her polished exterior, the way she looked at the world as though constantly calculating who was above her and who was below. To understand that, you had to know where she came from. Victoria Ashford had been born Victoria Kowalski in a small town in Ohio that most maps did not bother to name. Her father had worked as a mechanic at the local auto repair shop, coming home each night with grease under his fingernails and the smell of motor oil in his clothes. Her mother had worked the register at the Kroger supermarket, standing for 8 hours a day in sensible shoes that still made her feet ache by closing time. They were good people, decent people, people who lived paycheck to paycheck and considered a dinner out at Applebee's a special occasion. Victoria had known from childhood that she was different. The ease with which she solved problems that left her classmates baffled. The way teachers looked at her with a mixture of surprise and something almost like fear. The local newspaper had done a story on her when she was 14, the girl genius from the wrong side of town, and Victoria had felt both pride and shame in equal measure. Pride at being recognized, shame at the photographs of her modest house, her parents' second-hand furniture, the visible evidence of a life she was desperate to escape. She had escaped. A full scholarship to Harvard, a doctoral fellowship at MIT, postdoctoral research at institutions whose names opened doors throughout the academic world. Along the way, Victoria had shed her past like a snake shedding its skin. She changed her name, cultivated an accent that carried no regional trace, constructed a biography that mentioned private schools and cultural opportunities that had never existed. She became the person she had always believed she deserved to be. But the fear never left. The terror that someone would look past the polished surface and see the mechanic's daughter underneath. The knowledge that she had clawed her way up from nothing and that everything she had built could collapse if the wrong person asked the wrong questions. It made her work harder than anyone around her. It made her demand perfection from herself and everyone in her orbit. And it made her contemptuous of anyone who reminded her of where she had started. The cleaning staff at Ridgemont moved through Victoria's world like furniture. She registered their presence only when something was amiss, a trash can, not emptied a whiteboard, not cleaned a supply closet left unlocked. They existed to maintain the environment that allowed important people to do important work. The idea that one of them might have an inner life worth considering had simply never occurred to her. On the afternoon that would change everything, Victoria was teaching her graduate seminar on advanced differential equations. 28 students and in the tiered seating of room 217, laptops, open notebooks, ready, attention fixed on the woman who stood before the massive chalkboard covered in symbols. The topic was a particularly elegant proof regarding the stability of solutions to certain nonlinear systems work that built directly on Victoria's own research. She moved through the equations with the confidence of an artist unveiling a masterpiece. Her voice filled the room, each phrase precisely modulated to convey both authority and accessibility. The students followed along, some nodding, some frowning in concentration, all of them aware that they were being instructed by one of the best in the field. The door at the back of the room opened with a soft click. Marcus entered, pushing his cleaning cart, aiming for the trash can in the corner that he always emptied during this period. It was part of his regular schedule, a task he performed in dozens of rooms each day. He kept his head down and his movements quiet, a ghost passing through a world where he did not belong. But as he walked past the chalkboard, his eyes moved of their own accord across the equations. He had spent enough years studying advanced mathematics to recognize the territory Victoria was navigating. He had worked through similar problems in his notebook in the quiet hours when the building slept and his mind still hungered for the language of his former life. And he saw the error. It was subtle. A sign flip in the third line of the derivation, the kind of mistake that could happen to anyone during the flow of a complex proof. The negative that should have been positive, or perhaps the positive that should have been negative. Either way, it invalidated everything that followed. The elegant structure Victoria was building stood on a cracked foundation. Marcus knew he should keep walking. Every instinct developed over 8 years of invisibility screamed at him to empty the trash can and leave. He was a janitor. His job was to clean, not to correct. The professor would eventually catch her own mistake, or one of her brilliant graduate students would point it out. It was not his place to intervene, but something in him rebelled against the silence. Perhaps it was the sleepless nights he had spent watching Hazel struggle for breath. Perhaps it was the phone call he had received the previous week, the cardiologist's voice heavy with the weight of bad news. Perhaps it was simply that he had spent too long pretending to be less than he was, and the mask had finally cracked. His feet stopped moving, his body turned toward the board, and before he could reconsider, words were leaving his mouth. "Excuse me, Professor. His voice sounded strange in his own ears, rusty from disuse in academic settings. There's an error in the third line. The sign should be negative, not positive. The silence that fell over the room had physical weight. 28 heads swiveled toward the man in the navy coveralls, the cleaning cart standing forgotten beside him. Victoria's hand froze in midair chalk suspended above the board. Her expression cycled through surprise, confusion, and something that looked almost like fear before settling into cold fury. I beg your pardon. The words emerged coated in frost. The third line. When you applied the Leibniz rule to transform the integral, you needed to account for the sign change. It affects the entire derivation that follows. Victoria turned slowly to face the board. Her eyes traced the equations, her lips moving silently as she rechecked her work. The students watched in horrified fascination, witnessing something that had never happened before in any class she had taught. The seconds stretched into an eternity, and then Victoria's face went pale as the realization hit. The janitor was right. 8 years of maintaining invisibility, of keeping his head down and his mouth shut, of accepting his place in a hierarchy that had no room for his true capabilities. 8 years of patience and humility and the slow erosion of everything he had once been. And Marcus had thrown it all away for the sake of a sign error. Victoria's recovery was swift and brutal. Whatever internal acknowledgement she made of her mistake was immediately buried beneath the need to reassert control. Her spine straightened, her chin lifted. Her eyes found Marcus with the intensity of a predator marking prey. Get out. The words could have cut glass. Get out of my classroom and do not ever interrupt my teaching again. The students watched in silence, some embarrassed, some entertained, none willing to draw attention to themselves. Marcus felt the blood rising to his face, the shame of public humiliation mixing with something else, something that felt dangerously like anger. He had tried to help. He had seen an error and spoken the truth, and for that he was being thrown out like garbage. But he said nothing. He simply nodded, once gripped the handle of his cleaning cart, and pushed it through the door into the hallway. The last thing he heard before the door swung shut was Victoria's voice, already recovered, already confident, addressing her students. Let this be a lesson about people who don't know their place. The words followed Marcus down the corridor like a curse. The apartment in the Bronx occupied the 4th floor of a building that had seen better decades. No elevator, walls thin enough to hear the neighbors' arguments. A view of another building just like it, windows facing windows, in an endless mirror of urban struggle. Marcus climbed the 67 steps each evening, muscles aching from the day's work, and told himself that this was temporary. Everything was temporary. Someday things would be different. Hazel was waiting for him when he came through the door, her face lighting up with the kind of joy that made every stair worth climbing. She was small for 10, her growth stunted by the heart condition that had shadowed her entire life. Her skin held a pallor that makeup could never quite address. But her eyes, those blue eyes that were the same shade as his own, burned with an intelligence and spirit that sometimes made Marcus forget to breathe. Dad, I solved the problem you gave me. She held up her notebook pages covered in childish handwriting that nonetheless showed mathematical thinking years beyond her grade level. The one about the number patterns. I figured out the formula. Marcus took the notebook and examined her work, pride swelling in his chest. Hazel had inherited his gift for mathematics, the same intuitive grasp of abstract structures that had once marked him as extraordinary. At 10, she was already working through problems that would challenge most high school students. Her teachers did not know what to do with her. The public school system had no resources for a child who could have been doing calculus while her classmates struggled with fractions. This is excellent, sweetheart. He pulled her into a hug, careful of the leads that connected to the portable monitor she wore during waking hours. You're getting better every day. Is it as good as what you used to do when you were at the university? The question hit him like a physical blow. Hazel knew about his past, about the life he had left behind to care for her. He had never lied about it, never pretended that cleaning floors was his first choice or his highest calling. But hearing her ask the question, hearing the mixture of pride and guilt in her voice, reminded him of everything he had sacrificed and everything he would sacrifice again, without hesitation. You're better than I was at your age. He smiled, though it cost him something. You're going to do amazing things, Hazel, things I never even imagined. Later that night, after Hazel had fallen asleep with her worn stuffed bear clutched to her chest, Marcus sat alone at the kitchen table, and stared at the stack of medical bills that seemed to grow taller each month. The numbers blurred before his eyes. $847 for the echocardiogram, $1.240 for the specialist consultation, $3,500 for the medication that kept Hazel's heart beating in something like a normal rhythm. And looming over all of it, the number that haunted his dreams, $380,000. The cost of the surgery that Dr. Sarah Morrison had described in her careful, compassionate voice during their last appointment. The surgery that Hazel would need within 6 months if she was going to survive. Insurance would cover 60%. That left $152,000 that Marcus would need to find from somewhere. His salary was $42,000 a year. After rent, utilities, food, and the co-pays that insurance did not cover, he could save perhaps $300 a month if he skipped meals and never bought anything that was not absolutely essential. In 6 months, that would be $1,800. He was short $5,200. Marcus put his head down on the table and let the despair wash over him. He had spent 10 years fighting for Hazel's life, working every angle, exhausting every option. He had sold everything he owned that had any value. He had taken on debt that would follow him to the grave. He had given up a career that might have led to wealth and recognition, trading it for the steady paycheck and insurance benefits that kept his daughter alive. And it was not enough. It was never going to be enough. The phone call from Dr. Morrison had come a week earlier, shattering what little peace Marcus had managed to construct. The ventricular defect is expanding. The cardiologist's voice had been gentle but direct, the tone of someone who had delivered bad news too many times to soften it with false hope. The imaging shows significant deterioration since her last surgery. We're looking at complete repair within 6 months, Marcus. If we wait longer than that, the damage may be irreversible. Complete repair. The words sounded so simple, so clinical. They did not capture the hours on the operating table, the team of surgeons and specialists, the intensive care unit, with its beeping machines and exhausted nurses. They did not capture the risk, the 10% chance that Hazel would not survive the procedure, the 20% chance of complications that could affect her for the rest of her life. The cost, Marcus had asked, though he already knew the answer would destroy him. The surgical team, the hospital stay, the follow-up care. We're estimating $380,000. I know your insurance covers a significant portion, but I wanted you to have time to prepare. Time. As if time could conjure money from thin air. As if time could turn a janitor's salary into the small fortune required to save his daughter's life. Marcus had thanked the doctor and ended the call, and sat in the bathroom with the water running so that Hazel would not hear him cry. The poster appeared on the bulletin board in the mathematics building 3 weeks after the incident in Victoria's classroom. Marcus saw it during his early morning rounds, the bold lettering catching his eye as he pushed his cart past the common area where faculty and graduate students gathered between classes. Euler Challenge 2024, 35th Annual Mathematics Competition. Grand prize $75,000 cash, plus full PhD. Scholarship to partner universities MIT, Princeton, Stanford, Columbia. Open to all individuals. No educational prerequisites required online. Qualifying round, register at eulerchallenge.edu. Marcus stood before the poster for a long time, his cart forgotten beside him. The numbers swam in his head, rearranging themselves into calculations he could not stop performing. $75,000 would not cover the remaining surgical costs, but it would make a substantial dent. More importantly, a PhD scholarship to any of those institutions would be worth $250,000 over the course of the program. And a research position at a top university came with benefits that far exceeded anything available to hourly workers at a private college. It was impossible, of course. He had been out of academic mathematics for nearly a decade. The competition would attract the brightest doctoral students from the best programs in the country, people who had spent years receiving formal training while Marcus emptied trash cans and mopped floors. He had kept his mind sharp through self-study, but there were vast territories of modern mathematics that he had never properly explored. And yet, the qualifying round was online, anonymous. No one would know that the person solving the problems was a janitor from the Bronx with chalk dust on his hands and cleaning solution on his clothes. The mathematics would speak for itself, as it always did, pure and uncaring about the biography of the person wielding it. Marcus thought about Hazel, about the way she looked at him when she asked if he would win. He thought about the bills on the kitchen table, the numbers that grew while his options shrank. He thought about Victoria Ashford and her contempt, her certainty that people like him could not possibly understand the world she inhabited. He pulled out his phone and navigated to eulerchallenge.edu. The qualifying exam was 3 hours long, conducted in his apartment at 11 p.m. after Hazel had fallen asleep. Marcus sat at the kitchen table with his old laptop, the screen casting blue light across his face, and worked through 10 problems that ranged from challenging to nearly impossible. His pencil flew across scratch paper as he attacked each question, feeling the old pathways in his brain light up with the torrent of pure mathematical thinking. He solved 9 of them completely. The 10th defeated him, though he made substantial progress before time ran out. When he submitted his answers and closed the laptop, his hands were shaking, but not from fear, from exhilaration, from the feeling of being fully alive in a way he had almost forgotten. The results were posted 1 week later. Marcus Callahan, Ridgemont University staff, ranked 3rd in the nation among all qualifying competitors. He had been outscored only by 2 doctoral candidates from MIT and Princeton students with years of training and institutional support. A janitor from the maintenance department had placed in the top 3. The news spread through the mathematics community like wildfire. Within hours, Marcus's name was appearing on academic Twitter, on Reddit forums dedicated to mathematics, on news sites hungry for an unusual story. #JanitorGenius began trending as people debated whether the results were legitimate, whether some mistake had been made, whether a maintenance worker could really compete at this level. The story reached Victoria Ashford in her 4th-floor office, where she was reviewing the list of competitors who had qualified for the main event at Ridgemont, the competition she would chair as the host institution's representative. And when she saw the name, when she recognized the man who had dared to correct her in front of her students, something cold and hard settled into her chest. The faculty mixer was held in the grand ballroom of Ridgemont's historic Pemberton Hall, a space designed to impress with its vaulted ceilings and crystal chandeliers. Champagne flowed freely among professors and visiting scholars, the tinkling of glasses punctuating conversations about grant funding and publication strategies. Victoria moved through the crowd with practiced ease, accepting congratulations on her appointment as competition chair, exchanging pleasantries with colleagues she privately despised. Bradley Thornton stood beside her for much of the evening, his hand resting possessively on her lower back. At 45, Bradley was everything Victoria had thought she wanted. Harvard economics professor, old money family, connections that opened doors throughout the academic and financial worlds. He was also vain, dismissive, and fundamentally incurious about anything that did not directly serve his interests. Victoria had realized these flaws within months of their relationship beginning, but by then she had calculated the cost of leaving versus the benefits of staying, and the math had not favored departure. "I hear they're letting anyone compete these days." A professor from Yale, already on his 4th drink, gestured vaguely in the direction of nowhere in particular. "Staff members of all things. What's next, the kitchen workers?" Victoria's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. The qualifying round was open to all. He happened to score well. Well enough to make the competition look ridiculous. Bradley's voice carried the lazy contempt of someone who had never needed to prove himself to anyone. "Surely there are rules about appropriate participants." His scores were legitimate. Victoria heard herself saying the words and wondered why she was defending the man who had humiliated her. The competition has always been open to non-traditional candidates. Still, another professor, a woman from Stanford whose name Victoria could never remember, leaned in with conspiratorial interest. "It's rather unprecedented, isn't it? A janitor competing against doctoral candidates from the top programs in the country." The group laughed, and something about the sound made Victoria's stomach turn. She had climbed so far from Ohio, from the grease-stained hands of her father and the tired feet of her mother, and yet here she was surrounded by people who would despise her origins just as thoroughly as they despised the man who pushed a cleaning cart. But she pushed the thought aside. That was different. She had earned her place. She had proven herself through years of work and sacrifice. The janitor was just a janitor, someone who had somehow managed a lucky performance on a qualifying exam. When the real competition began, his true level would become apparent. "Well," she said, lifting her champagne glass, "we shall see how he performs under proper examination." "Quite confident, aren't we?" The Yale professor's eyebrows rose. Care to make a wager on it? A wager. How far do you think he'll make it? First round elimination second. The champagne was warm in Victoria's blood, loosening the filters that usually governed her speech. The memory of that day in the classroom, the janitor's calm voice pointing out her mistake, the snickers of her students barely suppressed. The rage she had nursed in private, the desire to prove that the moment meant nothing, that she remained superior in every way that mattered. If that man solves the problem from my doctoral dissertation in the final round, she heard herself saying, I will marry him. The group erupted in laughter, delighted by the absurdity of the statement. Victoria laughed along, secure in the impossibility of the scenario. Her dissertation problem had taken 3 years to solve with the resources of MIT at her disposal and a team of advisors guiding her work. No self-taught amateur could touch it in the 90 minutes of a competition round. What she did not notice was the graduate student near the edge of the group phone held casually in hand, recording the evening's festivities for social media. What she did not realize was that her words spoken in the flush of wine and wounded pride were already traveling through fiber optic cables toward an audience of millions. And what she certainly did not see was Marcus Callahan standing in the shadows of the service entrance where he had been sent to retrieve an extra case of wine from the storage room. He heard every word. The laughter, the contempt, the casual cruelty of people who had never had to wonder where their next meal would come from. He said nothing. He retrieved the wine and delivered it to the catering station and continued with his shift. But something had changed in him, some last residue of deference burning away in the heat of that moment. They thought he was nothing. They thought he was a joke. And in 6 months, his daughter would die unless he found a way to prove them wrong. The story of how Marcus Callahan became a janitor began with a love that burned too bright and a loss that left only ashes. Columbia University in the autumn was everything a young mathematician could dream of. Marcus had arrived at 21 with nothing but a scholarship and a hunger for knowledge that bordered on obsession. The lecture halls echoed with ideas that made his pulse race. The libraries held more books than he could read in a lifetime. The professors recognized in him something special, that rare combination of intuition and rigor that marked the truly gifted. By 22, he had completed his master's thesis on applications of group theory in cryptography work, so original that it was published in the Annals of Mathematics before he had even begun his doctoral research. The Sloan Foundation awarded him their prestigious fellowship. His advisor, Dr. Harold Brennan, had called him into his office one afternoon and said the words that Marcus still remembered verbatim a decade later. I have supervised over 40 doctoral students in my career. You are the most naturally gifted mathematician I have ever encountered. If you continue on this path, there is no limit to what you might achieve. And then he met Rachel Whitmore. She was working the late shift at a coffee shop near the library, a part-time job that supported her aspirations of becoming an artist. Her smile had a quality that made the equations in Marcus's head fall silent. Her laugh was medicine for the loneliness he had carried since childhood. They fell in love with the reckless intensity of people who have never been hurt badly enough to know caution. When Rachel told him she was pregnant, Marcus did not hesitate. He took a leave of absence from his doctoral program to prepare for fatherhood. They found a small apartment in Queens, planned a simple wedding, imagined a future where love would be enough to solve any problem. Hazel was born on a January night so cold that ice formed on the inside of the hospital windows. Marcus held his daughter for the first time and felt the universe reorganize itself around her tiny form. She was perfect. She was everything. She was the answer to a question he had not known he was asking. 3 months later, the pediatric cardiologist delivered the diagnosis that would define the rest of their lives. Ventricular septal defect. A hole in the wall between the chambers of Hazel's heart, causing blood to flow where it should not, forcing her tiny organ to work twice as hard as it should. She would need surgery, multiple surgeries over the course of years. The cost would be staggering. Marcus threw himself into the fight. He tutored students for money, took on data analysis contracts at night, did whatever work he could find between caring for his infant daughter and trying to maintain some connection to his research. Rachel worked double shifts, then triple. They were drowning in bills, struggling to stay afloat, their relationship straining under pressures it was never built to withstand. The arguments began, about money, about the future, about who was sacrificing more and whether any of it was enough. They were both exhausted, both terrified, both watching their dreams crumble while their daughter's heart labored to keep her alive. And then came the morning when Marcus woke to find the bed empty, the closet cleared out, and a note on the kitchen table that shattered what remained of his world. I can't do this anymore. I love Hazel, but I'm not strong enough. Please don't look for me. I'm sorry. Rachel. She had taken the $3,400 in their joint account, not all they had. Marcus sat on the floor of that apartment for 3 hours, his infant daughter crying in the next room, and learned what it meant to be truly alone. The decision to leave Columbia had not been a decision at all. There was no way to continue doctoral research while caring for a baby with a life-threatening heart condition. There was no family to help, no support network to share the burden. The equations that had once filled Marcus's mind with joy became irrelevant, noise static, drowning in the signal of his daughter's heartbeat. He needed insurance. He needed steady income. He needed a job that would allow him to be present for the endless appointments and emergencies that came with a child like Hazel. Ridgemont University offered all of that to its maintenance staff. The work was beneath his capabilities, but the benefits package was better than anything else he could find. When Marcus pushed his first cleaning cart through the halls, where professors lectured on the subjects he had once mastered, he told himself it was temporary, a means to an end, something he was doing for Hazel, not something that defined who he truly was. 8 years later, he was still telling himself the same thing. The day before the competition began, Marcus received a text message from an unknown number. "Withdraw now, you don't belong here. This is your only warning." He stared at the words for a long moment, then deleted the message without responding. Anonymous threats meant nothing compared to what he was fighting for. That evening, he called Hazel on video from the bathroom of his apartment, where he could speak without being overheard by neighbors. She was staying overnight at the hospital, another routine monitoring session that had become a regular feature of their lives. "Are you nervous, Dad?" Her face on the screen was thin but bright, her eyes sharp with the intelligence that sometimes frightened her teachers. "About the competition." "A little. There are a lot of very smart people competing. But you're smarter." She said it with the absolute certainty of a child who believed in her father. "You're the smartest person I know." "I'm not sure about that, sweetheart." "Well, I am." Her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "I looked you up online. I found your old papers. I didn't understand most of it, but I showed my teacher, and she said you must be some kind of genius." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "That was a long time ago, Hazel. Math doesn't care about time. You taught me that. Numbers are always the same, whether it's today or 100 years ago." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was smaller, more fragile. "You'll try your best, right? Whatever happens. I promise." "Good, because even if you don't win, you're still my hero." Her eyes were glistening now, though she was trying to hide it. "You never give up. You taught me that too." After the call ended, Marcus sat alone in the bathroom and for a long time letting the emotions wash through him. Fear, love, determination. The strange cocktail of feelings that came with knowing everything depended on what he did in the next few days. He thought about the professors who would be judging him, the students who would be competing against him, the audience that would be watching his every move. He thought about Victoria Ashford and her contempt, her certainty that he did not belong in her world. He thought about all the people who looked at his uniform and saw nothing but a servant, a function, a ghost in the machine of their privileged lives. And he thought about Hazel, about the monitors tracking her heartbeat, about the surgery she needed, about the future he was fighting to give her. Tomorrow he would walk into that auditorium and prove that brilliance did not require pedigree, that knowledge did not demand credentials, that the truth of mathematics remained true regardless of who spoke it. Or he would fail, and his daughter would die, and everything he had sacrificed would mean nothing. The morning of the first round dawned gray and cold autumn, asserting its dominance over the Connecticut hills. Marcus arrived at the main auditorium of Ridgemont University at 7:30 a.m., 90 minutes before the competition was scheduled to begin. He wore the cleanest clothes he owned, a button-down shirt from Goodwill and khakis that had been mended twice at the knee. He did not own a suit, had not owned one since he sold his last formal clothing years ago to help cover a medical bill. The auditorium was already filling when he entered. 800 seats arranged in a gentle arc facing a stage dominated by chalkboards and projection screens. Camera crews from 3 news networks were setting up equipment along the walls. A table at the front held positions for the judges, their names displayed on brass placards that gleamed under the lights. Marcus found his assigned seat among the 12 competitors, a chair at the end of the front row that seemed designed to emphasize his separateness from the others. To his left sat Derek Hayes from Harvard, the embodiment of everything Marcus was not. Tailored suit, expensive watch, the easy confidence of someone who had never questioned whether he belonged anywhere. Further down the row, Tessa Whitfield from Yale reviewed notes in a leather portfolio that probably cost more than Marcus's monthly grocery budget. They all glanced at him as he sat down. Some with curiosity, some with amusement, some with undisguised contempt. The janitor had arrived to play mathematician, and they were eager to watch him fail. At precisely 8:45, Victoria Ashford made her entrance. She walked to the center of the stage with the measured grace of someone performing for an audience, her dark suit impeccable, her expression radiating confidence and authority. The room fell silent as she approached the microphone. "Welcome to the 35th Annual Euler Challenge." Her voice filled the space without apparent effort. "Today begins a competition that represents the highest standards of mathematical excellence. Over the next 3 days, we will determine who among you truly possesses the depth of understanding and creative insight that distinguishes the exceptional from the merely competent." Her gaze swept across the competitors, lingering for just a moment on Marcus. The look contained nothing overt, no obvious malice, but Marcus felt its weight nonetheless. A reminder that she remembered. A promise that he would regret the moment he had dared to correct her. "Let us begin." The first problem appeared on the screen behind her, and the competition that would change everything finally started. But Marcus Callahan had already decided whether he won or lost, he would never be invisible again. The first problem materialized on the screen with the quiet authority of a gauntlet thrown. Prove that the sum of the first n odd numbers always equals a perfect square. Victoria announced the rules with practiced efficiency, 30 minutes individual whiteboards, full solutions required. The simplicity of the prompt drew confused glances from several competitors, doctoral candidates who had prepared for challenges worthy of their credentials. This was undergraduate material, almost insulting in its accessibility. Marcus recognized the trap immediately. Victoria had chosen something so basic that solving it correctly meant nothing, while solving it incorrectly would be catastrophic. The real test was not whether you could prove the statement, but how you chose to prove it. A mechanical approach would blend into the crowd. Something distinctive might expose either brilliance or pretension. Around him, the other competitors bent to their boards with varying degrees of confidence. Derek Hayes attacked the problem with the aggressive notation, filling his whiteboard with the formal apparatus of mathematical induction. Tessa Whitfield worked methodically, her handwriting precise and small, building the standard proof that any graduate student could produce in their sleep. The others followed similar paths, their solutions converging toward the same textbook approach, like streams flowing into a predictable river. Marcus held his marker without writing. He stared at the problem and let his mind drift backward, past the years of cleaning and struggling, past the failed marriage, and the desperate choices, back to the pure joy he had felt as a child discovering patterns in numbers. The sum of odd numbers. 1 plus 3 plus 5. 4, then 9, then 16. Perfect squares, growing like crystals, each layer adding exactly what was needed to complete the next larger square. He began to draw, not equations, diagrams, a single dot representing 1. 3 dots arranged in an L shape around it, forming a 2x2 square. 5 more dots extending the L, completing a 3x3 grid. The visual proof emerged on his whiteboard like a photograph developing in solution, obvious and elegant, and completely unlike anything the other competitors were producing. Each odd number forms the next layer of a growing square. His voice carried across the silent auditorium as he presented his solution to the judges. "We don't need induction to understand why this works. We can see it. The mathematics reveals its own structure when we stop drowning it in formalism." The auditorium stirred with whispered reactions. Dr. Constance Blackwood leaned forward in her judge's seat, something flickering in her expression that might have been recognition. The live stream chat exploded with comments from viewers who had never found mathematics beautiful before and were suddenly glimpsing what beauty meant. Victoria's face remained carefully neutral, but Marcus noticed the slight tension in her jaw, the almost imperceptible narrowing of her eyes. He had not merely solved the problem. He had transformed it into something that made her approach the standard academic approach look pedestrian by comparison. All competitors advanced to round two. The announcement came from Dr. William Crawford at MIT, his voice carrying a note of genuine interest that had been absent during the preliminary instructions. We will resume after a 30-minute recess. The break that followed crackled with a different energy than the morning's anxious anticipation. News cameras tracked Marcus as he walked toward the water fountain, their operators sensing that the story they had come to cover was evolving into something larger. Reporters shouted questions he did not answer. Social media notifications cascaded across phones throughout the building, the hashtag #JanitorGenius resurging with fresh momentum. In the judges' conference room behind the stage, Victoria convened an emergency meeting. The space was small and functional, designed for administrative discussions rather than confrontations, but the tension filling it demanded more room than the walls could provide. We need to increase the difficulty for round two. Victoria's voice carried the clipped precision of someone accustomed to having her suggestions treated as commands. The current problem set is clearly insufficient to distinguish genuine mathematical sophistication from lucky intuition. Dr. Constance Blackwood removed her reading glasses and fixed Victoria with a gaze that had intimidated generations of Princeton graduate students. The difficulty level was established weeks ago. Changing it now raises questions about fairness. Excellence requires the highest standards. We cannot lower our expectations simply because some competitors lack proper preparation. Interesting choice of words. The older woman's voice remained mild, but something sharp glinted beneath the surface. Which competitors are you concerned about specifically? The question hung in the air, its implications impossible to ignore. Victoria felt heat rising to her face and forced it back down through sheer will. She was not going to be painted as the villain in this narrative, not when everything she had worked for depended on maintaining her authority. I am concerned about the integrity of the competition, nothing more. A vote was called. Victoria and two sympathetic judges favored increased difficulty. Dr. Blackwood and Dr. Amanda Fitzgerald from Stanford opposed. Victoria's position as chair gave her the deciding authority. The motion passed. Round two began with a problem that made several competitors visibly blanch. Determine the convergence properties of a complex infinite series involving trigonometric functions and harmonic terms. This was graduate-level material, the kind of question that might appear in doctoral qualifying examinations, not public competitions with mixed audiences. The auditorium had grown fuller during the break. Word was spreading through the campus and beyond, drawing spectators who wanted to witness whatever was unfolding. The live stream numbers had doubled, then tripled. Somewhere in the building, Margaret Sterling, the billionaire philanthropist whose donations funded half of Ridgemont's scholarship programs, had taken a seat in the VIP section and was watching with the evaluating intensity of someone who had built an empire by recognizing talent that others overlooked. Marcus confronted the new problem with neither panic nor bravado. He understood what Victoria was doing, understood that she had raised the stakes specifically to expose the limits of his self-taught knowledge. The series on the screen required techniques he had studied only in fragments, approaches that assumed years of formal training he did not possess. But mathematics was not about memorizing procedures. It was about understanding structures. And structures revealed themselves to those who knew how to look. He spent the first 10 minutes simply staring at the series, letting its components settle into patterns. The sine terms oscillated predictably. The denominator grew quickly enough to suggest convergence. The cosine factor approached 1 as its argument approached 0. Each piece of the puzzle offered information about how the whole behaved. When he began writing, his approach diverged sharply from the other competitors. They were applying standard convergence tests, mechanically working through formal criteria without engaging with the underlying dynamics of the series. Marcus instead drew diagrams showing how the terms behaved, used comparison arguments grounded in intuition about the relative sizes of functions, and constructed an estimate for the sum that any viewer could follow without specialized training. The series converges absolutely. His presentation to the judges was quiet but certain. More interestingly, we can bound its value within a narrow range using only basic estimates. The advanced machinery usually applied to these problems obscures what's actually simple about them. Blackwood spoke before any other judge could respond. Mr. Callahan, your approach demonstrates exceptional mathematical intuition. The clarity of your reasoning would serve well in any classroom. Victoria's expression flickered with something that might have been anger or might have been fear. The validation from a Princeton mathematician delivered publicly before the cameras was transforming Marcus from a curiosity into a legitimate contender. 6 competitors were eliminated after round 2. The survivors included Marcus Tessa Whitfield, Derek Hayes, and 3 others from MIT, Stanford, and Berkeley. As the results were announced, Derek rose from his seat and approached Marcus with the languid confidence of someone who had never doubted his own superiority. "Interesting technique you've got." The words carried the patronizing warmth of a compliment designed to diminish. "Very creative for someone without formal training. I wonder how it holds up when the problems get really hard." Marcus met his gaze without flinching. "We'll find out." "I suppose we will." Derek's smile did not reach his eyes. "Though I imagine you'll be back at pushing your cart by tomorrow. Some of us actually belong here." The cameras caught the exchange, though not the words. Viewers would later speculate about what the Harvard Golden Boy had said to make the janitor's jaw tighten so perceptibly. That evening, the story exploded beyond the mathematics community into mainstream consciousness. The video of Victoria's champagne-fueled wedding declaration had surfaced on social media, shared and reshared millions of times with captions ranging from gleeful mockery to outraged condemnation. News networks ran segments with titles like "Janitor versus Professor, the competition dividing academia." Opinion pieces debated what the contest revealed about elitism, meritocracy, and the American dream. In her 4th-floor office, Victoria sat alone in the gathering darkness and watched her reputation crumble in real time. The comments beneath every video were savage. "Entitled professor thinks she's too good for working people. This is what's wrong with higher education. Someone needs to knock her off her high horse." Bradley Thornton called with instructions rather than comfort. "You need to end this tomorrow. Use whatever problem is necessary. If that man wins, you become a punchline forever." "I know what I need to do." "Do you? Because right now it looks like you're being outclassed by someone who cleans toilets for a living." The cruelty of the observation struck something deep in Victoria, something she had spent years bearing. Her father had cleaned toilets too in the early years before he got steady work at the auto shop. She remembered visiting him at work, once seeing him on his knees scrubbing a floor, while a manager stood over him with crossed arms and feeling the shame burn through her like acid. "I will handle it." Her voice emerged flat and hard. "Goodbye, Bradley." She ended the call before he could respond and sat in the darkness wondering when she had become the kind of person who needed handling. The semi-final round drew the largest live audience in the competition's 35-year history. Every seat in the auditorium was filled. Overflow crowds gathered in adjacent lecture halls where the proceedings were being streamed. Online viewership exceeded 100,000 concurrent viewers. The story of the janitor mathematician had captured something in the public imagination that transcended academic interest, touching on deeper questions about talent and opportunity and the arbitrary barriers that separated people from their potential. 6 competitors faced a problem drawn from linear algebra and matrix theory requiring both computational skill and geometric intuition. The difficulty was appropriate for the semi-final stage, challenging without being deliberately exclusionary. Victoria had considered using something harder, but recognized that the scrutiny she was under made any appearance of manipulation dangerous. Marcus worked through the matrix analysis with methodical precision, translating abstract operations into visual transformations that made their meaning transparent. His solution was neither the fastest nor the most technically sophisticated among the remaining competitors, but it possessed a quality that the judges found difficult to articulate, a sense that he understood not just how to solve the problem, but why the problem mattered, what it revealed about the deeper structures underlying mathematical thought. When the results were announced, 3 names advanced to the finals: Marcus Callahan, Tessa Whitfield, and Derek Hayes. The audience erupted in applause that seemed directed primarily at one of those 3 names. Marcus stood awkwardly amid the ovation, uncertain how to respond to attention he had spent years avoiding. He caught sight of Dr. Blackwood in the judges' row, and the older woman offered him a small nod that carried the weight of a much larger gesture. After the session concluded, he found a quiet corner of the building and called the hospital where Hazel was spending another night under observation. Her face appeared on his phone screen, thinner than he remembered, the fatigue of chronic illness, shadowing her eyes even as she smiled at the sight of him. "Everyone at the hospital watched you around today." Her voice carried the breathless excitement of a child sharing a secret. "The nurses were cheering. Dr. Morrison said you're famous." "I'm not famous, sweetheart. I just solved some math problems." "You're famous to me." She paused and her expression grew serious. In that way, she had the sudden shift from child to something older and wiser. "Dad, you have to promise me something. Anything. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to remember that you already proved something important. You showed everyone that you're still the person you used to be. That matters more than winning." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "When did you get so wise?" "I've been sick for a long time. You learn things." Her smile returned fragile and fierce. "Now go get some sleep. You have to beat that mean lady tomorrow." He laughed despite himself. "I love you, Hazel." "I love you too, Dad. More than all the numbers." The connection ended, and Marcus sat alone in the empty corridor, letting her words settle around him like armor. But the night was not over. When he returned to his apartment in the Bronx, climbing those familiar stairs, with legs heavy from exhaustion and nerves, he found an envelope slipped beneath his door. No return address, no postmark. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 3 typewritten sentences. "We know about your daughter's condition. Withdraw from the competition, or we will ensure that certain medical complications become more likely. This is not a negotiation." Marcus read the words 3 times. His hands shook not with fear, but with a rage so pure it felt almost like clarity. Someone was threatening Hazel. Someone with access to information that should have been private. Someone willing to cross lines that separated competition from criminality. He should go to the police. He should withdraw, protect his daughter, accept that some battles could not be won. That was the rational response, the responsible choice. But rationality had never saved anyone he loved. Responsibility had not prevented Rachel from leaving, or Hazel from being born with a broken heart. And withdrawal would mean, surrender would mean watching his daughter die slowly, while the people who had threatened her celebrated their victory. Marcus took a photograph of the letter with his phone. Then he called campus security. "I need to report a threat," he said, his voice steady despite the fury coursing through him. "And I need to speak with someone who can ensure my daughter's safety at Mount Sinai Hospital." The security officer who answered took down his information with professional concern. Within an hour, hospital administration had been notified and additional monitoring protocols had been put in place for Hazel's room. The letter was photographed and documented. A preliminary investigation was launched. Marcus would learn the source of the threat only after the competition ended. But for now, he had done what he could to protect his daughter while refusing to surrender to those who wanted him silenced. He sat at his kitchen table and opened his mathematics notebooks, preparing for whatever tomorrow would bring. The morning of the final round arrived wrapped in the kind of atmospheric drama that seemed almost intentional. Fog clung to the Connecticut hills, softening the Gothic edges of Ridgemont's architecture into something dreamlike and uncertain. Television news vans lined the streets outside the campus. National newspapers had sent reporters to cover what had somehow become the most watched academic competition in American history. Victoria stood backstage reviewing the problem that she had selected for the final round. It occupied 3 dense pages of mathematical notation, the centerpiece of her doctoral dissertation, the work that had established her reputation as a scholar of genuine importance. The problem concerned the existence and regularity of solutions to a particular class of nonlinear differential equations questions that touched on fundamental issues in mathematical physics and analysis. She had spent 3 years solving it with the full resources of MIT at her disposal and a team of advisors guiding her through the technical wilderness. No self-taught janitor could possibly approach it in 90 minutes. The choice was not merely difficult. It was designed to be humiliating, a public demonstration of the gulf between amateur enthusiasm and professional mastery. Dr. Blackwood appeared at Victoria's elbow, her expression unreadable. "That's the problem you're using. It meets the competition standards for the final round. It's your dissertation work, the work that took you 3 years to complete." Victoria turned to face the older woman, her jaw set with defiance. The competition is meant to identify exceptional mathematical talent. This problem will certainly accomplish that. Yes, Dr. Blackwood's voice carried a weight that made the single syllable feel like a verdict. It will accomplish something. She walked away before Victoria could respond, leaving the younger woman alone with her choice and its implications. The final round began at precisely 10 a.m. Victoria took the stage with the ceremonial gravity the moment demanded, announcing the format changes that would distinguish this round from those that preceded it. Three parts solve their problem within 90 minutes, present the solution to the judging panel, and defend the approach against aggressive questioning from expert mathematicians. The Ashford Standard, she called it the highest test of mathematical maturity ever administered in a public competition. When the problem appeared on the screen, the auditorium fell silent with collective incomprehension. Even the graduate students in the audience, those who had trained for years in advanced mathematics, struggled to parse the notation and understand what was being asked. The three competitors sat in their assigned positions, each confronting the same wall of symbols and implications. Tessa Whitfield recognized elements of the problem from her advisor's seminars. Her connection to Victoria provided context that the others lacked a map through at least part of the theoretical wilderness. Derek Hayes had encountered related work during his doctoral studies at Harvard, giving him footholds that were denied to someone outside the formal academic pipeline. Marcus looked at the problem and felt the first cold touch of despair. This was not merely difficult. This was territory he had never entered, concepts he had only glimpsed from a distance during his years of self-study. The notation assumed familiarity with Sobolev, space's operator, theory, functional analysis at levels he had never formally learned. Victoria had constructed a trap with walls too high to climb. The first 30 minutes were agony. Marcus tried approach after approach, each one collapsing as soon as it encountered the technical machinery he did not possess. His whiteboard filled with abandoned calculations, crossed-out equations, the visible evidence of a man drowning in waters beyond his depth. The cameras captured every moment of his struggle, broadcasting his humiliation to the millions who had believed in him. Victoria watched from her position on the judging panel, and something complicated moved behind her careful expression. This was what she had wanted, what she had planned, what she had assured herself was necessary to protect the standards that gave her life meaning. But watching it unfold, watching this man who had already lost so much lose something else in front of the entire world, she felt something she had not expected: doubt. At the 45-minute mark, Marcus made a critical error. He applied a theorem he only half understood, misremembering its conditions, and the entire structure he had been building collapsed into mathematical rubble. He stood before his whiteboard, hand frozen around the marker, staring at the proof that his approach was fundamentally flawed. The live stream chat had turned vicious. Some viewers mocked his failure with cruel enthusiasm. Others defended him with equal passion. The division reflected something larger than this competition fault lines in American society that had been waiting for exactly this kind of symbol to expose them. Perhaps we should offer struggling competitors the opportunity to withdraw with dignity. Victoria's voice cut through the silence, sweet and devastating. There is no shame in recognizing the limits of one's preparation. Marcus did not respond. He did not move. For a long moment, he seemed to have left his body entirely, retreating to some inner space where the humiliation could not reach him. Then Dr. Constance Blackwood did something unexpected. She rose from her seat on the judging panel and stood in silent witness, her posture conveying solidarity with the man who was failing so publicly. She said nothing. She made no gesture that could be called improper interference. But her presence communicated something that words would have diminished. You are seen. You are not alone. Whatever happens next, someone recognizes what you are trying to do. Marcus felt the older woman's attention like a hand on his shoulder. And in that moment of connection, something broke open in his memory. That Columbia seminar 12 years ago. The visiting professor's voice reedy, but certain, speaking about paths worn by those who walk before. The problem on the board was a creature of modern mathematics dressed in contemporary notation and requiring contemporary tools. But beneath the costume, every mathematical problem was asking a simple question. The notation was not the mathematics. It was just a language for describing mathematics. And languages could be translated. Marcus erased his whiteboard completely. 15 minutes remained. Not enough time to solve the problem the way Victoria expected, but perhaps enough time to ask a different question entirely. He began to see what he had missed. The differential equation Victoria had posed was asking about stability, about whether certain configurations would persist or dissolve over time. Underneath all the technical apparatus, it was a question about energy and equilibrium, about systems finding their way to states of minimal tension. These were questions that Euler and Lagrange had pondered centuries ago, using methods that his encyclopedic self-education had made familiar. The variational approach emerged on his whiteboard with startling clarity. Instead of trying to prove existence through the machinery of modern functional analysis, he reconceived the problem as a search for energy minimizers. The solutions Victoria sought were not arbitrary. They were the configurations that nature would choose if left to its own devices, the shapes that soap bubbles took and water followed. His chalk moved with increasing confidence. He established bounds using the Poincare inequality, a result from classical analysis that required nothing beyond what a dedicated self-teacher might have encountered. He applied direct methods from the calculus of variations techniques developed before the 20th century had complicated mathematics with its towering abstractions. He found a path through the forest that avoided the territories he had never mapped. Time. Victoria's announcement came like a gunshot. Her voice carried something that had not been there 90 minutes ago, a quality of uncertainty that she could not quite conceal. Marcus stepped back from his whiteboard. The solution was complete, elegant, in a way that made the problem seem simpler than Victoria had intended, a demonstration that profound questions sometimes admitted elementary answers. The auditorium held its breath. Dr. Blackwood was the first to move, walking from her judge's seat to examine the whiteboard more closely. Her expression shifted as she traced Marcus's reasoning, something like wonder replacing the professional reserve she usually maintained. "This is extraordinary," her voice carried through the silent space. "Not merely correct, but beautiful. He has found a path that none of us would have thought to take." Victoria rose from her position, her face pale, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "The method is unconventional. We need to verify that it meets the standards of rigor the competition requires." "Then let us verify." Dr. Blackwood's tone made the words a challenge rather than an agreement. The presentation and defense portions of the final round followed immediately. Tessa and Derek delivered competent solutions using the approaches Victoria had anticipated, the formal methods that assumed years of graduate training. Their work was correct and unremarkable, exactly what would be expected from top doctoral candidates at elite institutions. Then Marcus took the stage. He explained his solution not as a series of technical steps, but as a story, a journey through mathematical landscape that anyone could follow. The audience leaned forward in their seats, captivated by the clarity of his exposition, the way he made visible the connections between ancient wisdom and contemporary questions. Mathematics is not about the complexity of your tools. His voice filled the auditorium without apparent effort. It's about seeing the truth that the tools are trying to reach. Sometimes the shortest path to understanding runs through ideas that were old before our grandparents were born. Victoria's turn for questioning arrived like a sword being drawn. She approached the stage with weapons-prepared technical challenges designed to expose the gaps in his self-taught knowledge. "Mr. Callahan, your approach ignores the compactness issues that are central to this class of problems. Without compactness, how can you guarantee that your minimizing sequence actually converges to a solution?" Marcus did not flinch. "If you examine lines 7 through 12, Professor, you'll see that I addressed compactness through direct energy estimates combined with the Poincare inequality. The convex structure of the functional ensures that we don't need the general compactness arguments your objection assumes. The path is different, but the mathematics remains rigorous." "And what about Sobolev embedding? You haven't used any of the standard embedding theorems that this type of analysis requires." "Because I don't need them." His voice remained calm, almost gentle, the voice of a teacher explaining something obvious to a struggling student. "I work directly with the energy functional rather than passing through abstract function spaces. The regularity you're concerned about follows from the convex structure itself via classical elliptic theory. I cited the relevant theorem in line 15. Victoria pressed harder, her questions becoming more pointed, more desperate. Each time Marcus deflected with quiet competence, his answers revealing depths of understanding that his unconventional methods had obscured. The audience watched the exchange with growing fascination, sensing that they were witnessing not merely a competition, but a reckoning. From her seat in the front row, Tessa Whitfield found herself nodding along with Marcus's explanations. She had spent 3 years as Victoria's student, learning to see mathematics through her advisor's eyes. But watching this man, this janitor who had learned the subject on his own, she recognized something that her formal education had never provided: a love for the truth that transcended the apparatus used to reach it. He's right. Her voice emerged without conscious decision, cutting through the tension that had filled the room. The convex structure really does simplify everything. I should have seen that approach myself. Derek Hayes, seated beside her, stiffened with surprise. You're taking his side. I'm taking mathematics' side, which is what we're supposed to be doing. Victoria stood alone at the front of the auditorium. Her prepared attacks exhausted, her certainty shattered. She had designed this problem to destroy Marcus, and instead it had revealed something about both of them that she was not prepared to face. The judges convened for 20 minutes of verification. They worked through Marcus's proof line by line, testing each step against the standards of rigor that would apply to any published paper. Dr. Crawford from MIT checked the energy estimates. Dr. Fitzgerald from Stanford verified the classical references. Dr. Blackwood examined the overall structure of the argument, the way its pieces fit together into something greater than their sum. When they returned to announce their verdict, the auditorium vibrated with anticipation that was almost physical. The solution submitted by Mr. Callahan is complete, rigorous, and correct. Dr. Blackwood's voice carried the weight of institutional authority. More than that, it demonstrates a level of mathematical creativity that exceeds our ordinary expectations. This is not merely a competition performance. It is a contribution to mathematical knowledge. The applause began somewhere in the back rows and swept forward like a wave. People rose to their feet, cameras flashed the live stream, chat exploded with celebration. Someone shouted something about wedding bells, and laughter rippled through the crowd with an edge of genuine joy. But the competition was not yet over. The judges still had to formally compare the three final solutions and render their verdict. Victoria still sat on the panel, her vote still counted, her opposition still capable of blocking the result that the crowd had already decided was inevitable. And somewhere in the chaos of the moment, Marcus felt his phone vibrate in his pocket. A message from campus security. Source identified, graduate student in mathematics department. Threat neutralized. Your daughter is safe. He had solved the problem. The threat had been contained. And somewhere in a hospital room 40 miles away, Hazel was watching the live stream with nurses gathered around her bed, cheering for the father who had never stopped fighting. The private conference room where Margaret Sterling led Marcus smelled of old books and furniture, polished, a sanctuary of quiet, removed from the celebration still thundering through the auditorium. She closed the door with deliberate care and gestured toward a leather armchair, positioned near windows that overlooked the campus grounds where news vans and curious crowds continued to gather in the fading afternoon light. Marcus remained standing. The adrenaline from the competition had not yet subsided, leaving him hyper-aware of every detail: the grain of the mahogany table, the muted tick of an antique clock, the evaluating quality of the older woman's gaze as she studied him with the patience of someone accustomed to taking the measure of people before speaking. You performed exceptionally today. Her voice carried the controlled precision of someone who never wasted words. The mathematical community will be discussing your solution for years, but I suspect you already know that what happened in that auditorium matters less to you than what happens next. My daughter needs surgery. Everything else is secondary to that. Direct, good. I appreciate directness. Margaret moved to the window, silhouetting herself against the gray October sky. I have resources that most people cannot imagine. Private investigators, research analysts, access to information that the general public never sees. When your name appeared on the preliminary results 3 weeks ago, I had my team compile a comprehensive file on your background. The invasion of privacy should have angered him. Instead, Marcus felt only the familiar exhaustion of someone whose life had been shaped by forces beyond his control for too long. Then you know about Hazel, about the defect, about the money. I know everything. She turned to face him, her expression carrying something he had not expected: recognition rather than pity. Columbia University 12 years ago, doctoral candidate in pure mathematics, Sloan Fellowship recipient. 3 publications before completing your master's degree, including one in a journal that rarely accepts work from students at any level. Harold Brennan called you the most gifted mathematical mind he had encountered in 4 decades of teaching. That was another life. No, that was your life interrupted by circumstances that would have destroyed most people entirely. The fact that you maintained your capabilities while working as a janitor for 8 years, that you continued studying and growing and refusing to abandon who you truly are, speaks to something that credentials cannot measure. She paused and her voice softened almost imperceptibly. I will cover the complete cost of your daughter's surgery, every dollar that insurance does not pay. The funds will be transferred to Mount Sinai within the week. The words arrived like a physical impact too large to process immediately. Marcus found himself gripping the back of the leather chair, his knuckles white against the aged brown surface. Why would you do that? Because I recognize exceptional capability when I see it, and I understand that such capability often requires support that our systems fail to provide. Margaret returned to the chair across from him and sat at her posture, suggesting that the conversation was entering territory she considered even more significant. I built my company by identifying potential that others overlooked. Scientists working in obscurity, engineers trapped in positions that wasted their talents, physicians whose ideas were too unconventional for traditional institutions. I found them, I funded them, and I watched them transform their fields. I'm not looking for a patron. Good, because I'm not offering patronage, I'm offering partnership. She leaned forward, her gaze intensifying. I intend to establish a scholarship fund, the Callahan Fellowship, $15 million permanently endowed, dedicated to supporting university employees who possess academic potential but lack traditional credentials. Janitors, cafeteria workers, maintenance staff, security personnel, the invisible workforce that keeps our institutions running while being systematically excluded from the opportunities those institutions provide. Marcus absorbed the scope of what she was proposing. $15 million, a permanent fund, his name attached to something that could change lives for generations. You want me to be the face of this program. I want you to be its ambassador, to speak with applicants, to review candidates, to demonstrate through your presence that the path you walked remains open for others willing to travel it. She rose again, restless with the energy of someone accustomed to acting rather than waiting. The details can be negotiated. What matters now is whether you accept the principle. Will you help me build something that addresses even a fraction of the potential our society wastes? He thought of the other janitors at Ridgemont, the conversations he had overheard during breaks, the glimpses of intellect and ambition that flickered through their words before being extinguished by the demands of work and survival. He thought of all the people like him scattered across universities and corporations and institutions of every kind, their gifts unknown because no one had thought to look for them. Yes, I accept. Margaret's smile carried genuine warmth, the first unguarded expression she had shown since they entered the room. I was hoping you would say that. Now there is someone else who wishes to speak with you. She has been waiting since the announcement. She moved toward the door and opened it, revealing Dr. Constance Blackwood, standing in the corridor with an expression that suggested she had been rehearsing difficult words. I will leave you to your conversation. Margaret nodded to the older mathematician. Dr. Blackwood, thank you for what you did today. Your integrity elevated the entire proceeding. The integrity belonged to the mathematics itself. I merely refused to let it be suppressed. The billionaire departed, and the Princeton professor entered, closing the door behind her with the carefulness of someone handling fragile things. She took the chair Margaret had vacated and sat in silence for a long moment, studying Marcus with eyes that seemed to be looking at something beyond his physical presence. You do not remember our previous meeting. The words emerged as statement rather than question. Marcus searched his memory, finding nothing that connected this woman to his past. I remember you from the judging panel, from when you stood up during my struggle, but before that, no. 12 years ago, a seminar at Columbia on variational methods in classical analysis. The attendance was sparse, only 3 graduate students willing to sacrifice an evening for material that most considered outdated. You sat in the front row and asked questions that revealed understanding far beyond your years. The memory surfaced slowly like something rising through dark water. a visiting lecturer whose passion for historical approaches had seemed eccentric at the time. A discussion of Euler and Lagrange that had planted seeds Marcus would not recognize until decades later when they bloomed into the solution that saved him during the competition. The lecture on classical methods, but the speaker was Thomas Whitmore, my mentor. He was too ill to travel, so I delivered his material in his voice, channeling his perspectives as faithfully as I could. He died 3 years later, never knowing how far his influence would eventually reach. Her expression softened with remembered affection. He would have been proud beyond measure of what you accomplished yesterday. You proved everything he believed about the enduring power of fundamental thinking. Marcus felt connections clicking into place, the hidden architecture of coincidence and meaning that had shaped his path to this moment. You recognized something during the competition, before my solution became clear. I recognized your mind, the way you approached problems, the patterns in your reasoning. It carried echoes of Thomas's teaching that were unmistakable to anyone who knew his work. She paused, and something that looked almost like guilt crossed her features. I should have intervened more directly. When Victoria altered the competition format, when she chose that impossible problem from her dissertation, I should have objected more forcefully. My silence was a form of complicity that I will carry. You stood up. When I was failing, when everyone else was watching me drown, you rose from your seat. That meant something. Did it? I wonder sometimes whether bearing witness is merely a comfortable substitute for genuine action. Whether standing up without speaking is just a way of feeling virtuous while changing nothing. Her gaze held his with uncomfortable directness. But I did not come here to debate the ethics of silent protest. I came to make you an offer. Another offer. Columbia wants you back, not as a maintenance worker, but as a doctoral candidate resuming the research you abandoned 12 years ago. Full funding access to whatever resources you require, and a faculty position waiting when you complete your degree. The department was unanimous in extending this invitation. The magnitude of the offer staggered him. Columbia, the institution he had fled in desperation, was opening its doors as though his departure had been a pause rather than an ending. I would need to be close to Hazel, her surgery, her recovery. Mount Sinai is 20 minutes from campus. Housing can be arranged nearby. The program will accommodate whatever flexibility your situation requires. Dr. Blackwood leaned forward with intensity. We lost something valuable when you left. The mathematical community has now seen what that loss meant. We want the opportunity to witness what you might still achieve. Marcus thought of Hazel, of the surgery that would now happen, of the future that had seemed impossible 3 days ago and was now taking shape before him. He thought of the classrooms where he might teach the research that waited unfinished, the person he had been, and the person he might yet become. My answer is yes. Dr. Blackwood's expression transformed with something that looked almost like relief. I was hoping you would say that, but there is one more conversation you need to have before this day ends. Someone else wishes to speak with you, and I suspect you will find this exchange more difficult than any mathematical problem you have ever faced. She rose and moved toward the door, pausing with her hand on the frame. What you accomplished in this competition will be studied for years. But the greater accomplishment is what you demonstrated about human potential. You refused to accept that your circumstances defined your worth. In a world that wanted to make you small, you insisted on remaining exactly who you are. She departed, and Marcus waited in the quiet room, knowing who would enter next, uncertain what he would feel when she did. Victoria came through the door like someone approaching a reckoning she could not postpone. Her tailored suit, impeccable that morning, showed signs of the day's strain, a slight rumpling at the shoulders, a looseness in the way the fabric hung. Her face carried exhaustion and something else, something that looked almost like the relief that follows confession. She did not sit. She positioned herself near the window, maintaining distance, her arms crossed in a posture of self-protection that contrasted sharply with the authority she had projected during the competition. I came to offer an apology. Her voice emerged stripped of its usual precision, raw in a way that made her seem younger than her years. While the public statement I made in the auditorium, that was necessary, but it was not sufficient. I owe you something more personal. Marcus remained in his chair, watching her, noting how completely the arrogance that had defined their every interaction had dissolved. I am listening. When I looked at you, I saw a mirror reflecting everything I had worked to forget. A reminder that the distance I had traveled could collapse in an instant if the wrong person asked the wrong questions. Her voice tightened. My cruelty was never really about you. It was about the terror of becoming again what I had fought so hard to escape. Understanding the source of cruelty does not excuse the cruelty itself. No, it does not. She met his eyes for the first time since entering the room. I designed a competition specifically to destroy you. I selected problems that would expose the gaps in your knowledge. I wanted to prove that formal training was the only legitimate path, because believing that validated every sacrifice I had made. If someone without credentials could achieve what I achieved, then what was the purpose of everything I gave up? Marcus let her words settle, feeling their weight and complexity. The woman before him was not the simple villain he had prepared to confront. She was something more troubling, a survivor who had responded to systematic oppression by becoming an instrument of that same oppression. What do you want from me, Victoria? Not forgiveness. I have no right to request that. She uncrossed her arms, and the gesture left her looking almost vulnerable. I want the chance to become someone different. Not for your sake or for the sake of public opinion, for mine. Because the person I was during this competition is not the person I want to carry into whatever years remain. And what would that look like, becoming different? I am leaving Ridgemont. The position I built here was constructed on assumptions I no longer accept. She moved away from the window toward the center of the room. I have accepted a teaching role at a community college in the Bronx. The students there do not come from privilege. They come from backgrounds like mine. Perhaps I can offer them something I could never offer the students I have been teaching. The information surprised Marcus more than anything else she had revealed. Victoria Ashford Ornament of the academic elite voluntarily surrendering her prestigious position to teach at a community college. It was either genuine transformation or elaborate performance, and he found himself unable to determine which. That represents a significant change. It is the only change that makes sense. She moved toward the door, then hesitated. I should tell you something else. The threatening letter you received, I did not send it. I did not know of its existence until campus security informed me this afternoon. One of my graduate students thought he was protecting me, protecting my reputation. Marcus nodded. I know. Security traced it. The student has been expelled. He should face criminal charges. Victoria's voice carried genuine anger. Threatening a child. There are lines that should never be crossed, regardless of loyalty. The university is deciding whether to involve law enforcement. Marcus paused. I wanted you to know that I never suspected you of that. Whatever else you are guilty of, that boundary I knew you would not have crossed. Something shifted in Victoria's expression. Gratitude, perhaps, or relief that at least one accusation would not be added to her ledger. Victoria. The word emerged before he had decided to speak it. Would you want to get coffee sometime, not as enemies? Just as two people who might understand each other better than we expected. She turned, and her expression held something that resembled wonder. After everything I did to you, you would offer that? I have spent a long time carrying anger and resentment. It is exhausting. Perhaps we both have things to learn from each other. Perhaps we are more alike than either of us wanted to admit. Coffee. She tested the word as though encountering it for the first time. Yes, I would like that very much. She departed, leaving Marcus alone with the weight of conversations that had reshaped his understanding of nearly everyone involved in the drama that had consumed the past 3 days. The surgery took place on a gray November morning, 3 weeks after the competition ended. Mount Sinai's pediatric cardiac unit occupied a floor that smelled of antiseptic and anxiety, its corridors populated by parents whose faces carried the same expression of desperate hope that Marcus saw in mirrors and reflective surfaces throughout the building. The surgery lasted 7 hours, during which Marcus sat in the waiting room with mathematics notebooks he could not bring himself to open, and a phone that kept buzzing with messages he could not bring himself to answer. The world continued its fascination with the story of the janitor who had defeated the academic establishment, but inside these walls nothing existed except the operating theater, where surgeons worked to reconstruct his daughter's heart. Dr. Sarah Morrison emerged at 4:47 in the afternoon, still wearing surgical scrubs, her expression carrying information before she spoke. The procedure was successful. Her voice combined professional satisfaction with something warmer, the genuine joy of someone who had chosen this work because it mattered. The defect has been completely repaired. Hazel's heart is functioning normally for the first time in her life. Marcus felt his legs lose their capacity to support him. He sank into the nearest chair, tears streaming down his face, unable to speak or move or process the overwhelming relief that flooded through him. "She's awake and asking for you," and Dr. Morrison's tone softened further. "She wants to know if you brought any math problems for her to work on while she recovers." The laugh that escaped him was half sob, the release of 10 years of fear finally finding its exit. He rose on unsteady legs and followed the doctor toward the recovery room where his daughter waited. Hazel looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, surrounded by monitoring equipment that beeped its steady confirmation of her transformed condition. Her face was pale, her movements restricted by bandages and IV lines, but her eyes held clarity and brightness that Marcus had never seen before. "Dad?" The single syllable carried more meaning than any mathematical proof could convey. "Did I miss anything important?" He took the chair beside her bed and grasped her hand, feeling its warmth, its life, its future. "Nothing that couldn't wait for you. How do you feel?" "Different." She squeezed his fingers with strength that surprised him. "Like something that was always wrong finally got fixed. Like my body finally knows what it's supposed to do. The doctor said you did beautifully, that your heart is strong now, that you're going to be able to do everything other kids do." "Everything?" Her eyes widened with a hope that broke something open in Marcus's chest. "Like running, really running, not just walking fast until I get tired. Everything." She was quiet for a moment, processing this information with the seriousness she brought to important concepts. "Dad, when I get better, will you teach me more math? The hard stuff like what you do. I will teach you anything you want to learn, but right now you need to rest. Your body has a lot of healing to do. Will you stay with me until I fall asleep?" "I will stay as long as you need me. I will always stay as long as you need me." Her eyes drifted closed, exhaustion and medication pulling her toward the deep rest her body required. Marcus remained beside her bed until the evening light faded and the hospital corridors grew quiet with night, watching the monitors that displayed the steady rhythm of a heart finally doing its job without fighting against itself. 2 years later, Marcus stood at the front of a Columbia lecture hall, ready to deliver his first class as Dr. Marcus Callahan, Assistant Professor of Mathematics. The dissertation defense had taken place 3 months earlier, in a room packed with colleagues and journalists who had followed his story since the competition. The examining committee's unanimous approval had felt less like an ending than a beginning. Hazel sat in the third row, 12 years old now, tall and healthy, and sharp-tongued in ways that delighted and occasionally alarmed him. She had been running in the schoolyard during recess, playing games that required physical exertion, experiencing for the first time the ordinary childhood that her condition had always denied. Her presence in his classroom was unofficial. He had insisted on witnessing his first lecture, and Marcus could deny her nothing. Derek Hayes had returned to Harvard after the competition, his second-place finish, a humiliation he carried like a wound. The academic rumor mill suggested he had transferred to a business program, abandoning mathematics entirely. Tessa Whitfield had completed her doctorate under a different advisor and now held a research position at Berkeley, her thank you note to Marcus still pinned to his office bulletin board. "You showed me that there's more than one way to see," she had written. "I'm still learning to look." The classroom held 40 first-year students, none of whom had followed his story, none of whom knew anything about janitors or competitions or impossible recoveries. To them, he was simply their calculus professor, another figure of authority in an institution designed to humble newcomers. He thought about how to begin, what words might matter to students, starting their journey through mathematical thinking. He remembered his own beginning, the foster homes and library books, and discovery that numbers followed rules, regardless of who you were. Before we start the formal material, I want to share something that most teachers never mention. He moved to the board and drew a single point. This is where everything begins, not with equations or theorems, with counting, with the basic human impulse to understand quantity and relationship. Everything we do in this course, everything that has ever been accomplished in mathematics, builds on this foundation. He added 3 points around the first, forming a small square. The giants who came before us were not fundamentally different from any of you. They were people who looked at the world and asked questions. They followed curiosity wherever it led. They struggled and failed and tried again until understanding emerged. 5 more points completed the next layer of the growing pattern. Some of them enjoyed every advantage that wealth and position could provide. Others taught themselves from borrowed books by candlelight. The mathematics did not care about their credentials. It cared only about the truth of their reasoning, the validity of their proofs, the depth of their understanding. He turned to face the students setting down the chalk. You will struggle in this course. Some of you will fail exams and question whether you belong here. When that happens, remember what I am about to tell you. He paused, letting the silence build. Mathematics does not care who you are or where you came from. It asks only whether you are willing to follow truth wherever it leads. If your answer is yes, then you belong here. You belong in any room where mathematics is being done. Your circumstances do not determine your potential. Only your choices can do that. He returned to the board and began writing the first equations of the semester. In the third row, Hazel watched her father with a pride that threatened to overflow into tears. She had a notebook open in front of her, already filling with calculations that would have challenged students twice her age. Margaret Sterling's gift, the leather-bound journal embossed with her initials, sat in her backpack, 3/4 full of mathematical explorations that her teachers at the gifted program struggled to evaluate. When the lecture ended and students filed out, she remained in her seat until only the two of them occupied the room. That was good, Dad. Her voice carried the casual confidence of a child who had learned that questions were always welcome. The stuff about the dots, you should use that every semester. Marcus smiled, gathering his notes. You think so? Yeah, it made the math feel less scary, like something anyone could do if they tried hard enough. That's because anyone can do it if they try hard enough. Hazel was quiet for a moment, her expression shifting into something more serious. Dad, can I ask you something? Always. When you were cleaning those buildings all those years, did you ever actually believe this would happen? That you'd be here teaching at Columbia, with me healthy and everything working out? Marcus considered the question with the care it deserved, the honesty that Hazel had always demanded from him. No, most days I believed it wouldn't. That I would keep cleaning forever, that you would keep getting sicker, that the person I used to be would fade away completely until nothing remained except the uniform. Then why didn't you give up? Because giving up would have meant accepting that the world was right about me, that credentials mattered more than capability, that circumstance determined worth. He met his daughter's eyes, seeing in them the intelligence and determination that had sustained them both through the darkest years. And because of you, you never looked at me like I was diminished. You expected me to be extraordinary. I could not let you down. Hazel was quiet for a moment, processing his words with the seriousness she gave to important concepts. I think you're wrong about one thing. Her voice was gentle but certain. You didn't do it only for me. You did it for yourself too. Because you knew who you really were, even when nobody else could see it. You kept the books hidden in your locker. You kept solving problems in your head. You kept being yourself even when everything around you said you should be smaller. The truth of her observations settled into him, rearranging something that had been misaligned for years. When did you become so wise? I had a good teacher. Her smile carried echoes of the child she had been and the woman she was becoming. The best one. Even when he was pushing a cleaning cart, he was teaching me everything that mattered. She gathered her backpack and moved toward the door, pausing with her hand on the frame. Dad, I think I want to be a teacher someday. A math teacher. Not at a fancy university. At a regular school where the kids are like I was. Sick or poor or whatever. Kids who believe they can't do things because nobody ever showed them they could. Marcus felt something catch in his chest. You would be extraordinary at that. I know. Her grin held pure 12-year-old confidence. I learned from the best. She disappeared into the hallway, leaving Marcus alone in the empty lecture hall. He stood for a moment at the window, watching students cross the courtyard below, each carrying dreams and struggles and potential that had not yet been measured or tested. The equation of his life had finally balanced. Somewhere in a community college classroom across the city, Victoria Kowalski, she had reclaimed her original name, was teaching students that their backgrounds did not determine their futures. Somewhere in a hospital, surgeons were repairing children's hearts, creating possibilities that had not existed before. Somewhere in university basements, in office buildings and hospitals and schools, invisible people were refusing to accept that circumstances defined worth. The Callahan Fellowship had selected its first cohort of recipients the previous month. 32 individuals from universities across the country, each carrying stories of potential that institutions had failed to recognize. A janitor from Ohio with a gift for chemistry, a groundskeeper from Massachusetts who wrote poetry, a security guard from Texas whose understanding of computer science surpassed many professionals in the field. Marcus returned to his desk where student papers waited for grading and a half-finished proof waited for completion, and the endless work of being useful waited for his attention. The numbers never lied. They followed their own logic regardless of who was asking, indifferent to credentials and pedigree and all the arbitrary markers that human systems use to separate people from their potential. That was the truth he had carried through 8 years of cleaning and a lifetime before that. That was the truth he would carry into whatever years remained. Mathematics did not care who you were. It cared only whether you were willing to see.